if you're an IT, you're a data custodian. So you have the responsibility to protect that data, whether you're doing encryption, whether you're backing it up and testing that. And security is the same. You have to make sure you apply the patches in a timely manner. And if there are vulnerabilities, to address them. So I've turned it into their own responsibilities right now, right? And all I do is just make sure that those things are done in a timely manner.
SC Media and our sponsor Arctic Wolf are proud to present this month's CISO Stories program. Each month, the CISO Stories program explores a cybersecurity topic selected by the Cyber Risk Alliance's CISO community and provides content that examines that topic from a variety of perspectives. Hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, best-selling author of CISO Compass, the CISO Stories weekly podcast features content powered by the 1,100-plus members of Cyber Risk Alliance's CISO community. Listen to previous CISO Stories podcast episodes at CISOstoriespodcast.com. Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/CSC. I'm your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Olusegun, who is the CISO for the New York Department of Transportation. Welcome, Olu.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So, Olu, what attracted you to the cybersecurity field?
I actually started my career as a network engineer. So I started from the technical side, configuring firewalls, checkpoints, remote access. And as technology was evolving in the early 2000s, it became obvious to me that, security was going to be an avenue of growth and development. And I just found it fascinating that as people were getting on board with the internet, that there were people who initially actually started, disrupting things for fun. Unfortunately, now it's really more, geopolitical issue, and a lot of corruption now that is in place. I remember when I first started, I had a job with an organization, a Fortune 500 company. And a week after I joined, I had an interesting incident that happened. Somebody sent an email, I clicked on it, and fortunately, it wasn't malware. But what happened was, there was this joker that appeared and was laughing hysterically. And it was a worm. It propagated through the whole company quickly. And just two days into the organization, I became notorious.
Yeah, that's a good way to start your cybersecurity career.
Yeah.
So today we're going to be talking about building effective partnerships for a successful cybersecurity resilience program. So tell us about that. What makes a cybersecurity program resilient?
Yeah, it's a combination of many things, but I think the first thing really is whatever the organization is embracing that, right? Understanding that the threat landscape has changed and nobody is safe or secure anymore, right? So it's not a matter of when, it's a matter of if, right? So typically, IT folks and security folks think it's all their problem, but it's an organization issue. So when senior leadership, the executive or the C-suite understands that it might be inevitable, now you can now start building a program. And the most important thing is what we call the tone at the top. If senior leadership backs it with resources, whether it's financial or with human resources, then you can now start building up a program, right? Because now everybody gets on the same page. They understand they have a stake, in the well-being of the organization's data and information resources, right? So now building it up from the top down is it's the most successful way to be able to build an effective and efficient program.
So a lot of CISOs struggle with that of getting that buy-in at the top of the organization. What have you found that has worked for you?
For me, I've been very fortunate because there's always this tension between the chief information officer and the chief information security officer, right? So if you report to the chief information officer, as it is in some organization, as it is in my case, it's really, building that partnership with the chief information officer, right? Making sure he or she understands what you're doing and why you're doing it. Because the chief information officer's role, is, yeah, let's get all these products and services to the end user and to the public as quickly as we can, right? And unfortunately, the chief information officer's role is to say, awesome. But hey, we need to put all these additional controls in place. And that delays things, the deliverables. So if you have the buy-in from the chief information officer and you work together to make sure that as you're building all these new programs, whether it's applications or new systems, security is part of it and you get on the same page. So that way, when you're working with the business, you can factor all that into it. It's not, you can tell them, yeah, typically it might take 3 months to do this, but it will probably be 6 months because we have to add these additional controls, run these vulnerability scans, do the security risk assessment. So it doesn't come to them, as a shock at the last minute, right? So it's you're really building that relationship and making sure that the chief information officer to articulates that if it's a board or to senior leadership, and everybody gets on the same page. That has worked for me. I've been very fortunate to work with chief information officers like that. There were some that we had to work together for them to really understand that. But I think, as things have changed in the past few years, everybody understands the importance of security now. So it's a little bit easier to make progress and build those partnerships.
The cybersecurity industry has an effectiveness problem. New technologies, vendors, and solutions emerge every year, yet we still see headlines filled with high-profile breaches. Designed to help you monitor, detect, respond, and recover from cyber attacks whenever and wherever they strike, Arctic Wolf provides the first cloud-native security operations platform, empowering organizations of any size to stand up to world-class security operations with a push of a button. Learn more about their suite of fully managed security operations solutions at CISOstoriespodcast.com/Arctic Wolf. So I hear this a lot from CISOs that they feel powerless when they do have that reporting relationship to the CIO. That when push comes to shove and the CIO has made commitments to the business that we're going to deliver this product at this time, and then security comes in there and says, well, wait a minute, these controls need to be in place before we can launch. Have you ever had those situations where you've been faced with that?
Oh yeah, I've been in this business, in security field for almost 2 decades now. And although I work for New York City Department of Transportation now, before that I worked for the New York City Health and Hospitals for 15 years. And we're talking healthcare, right? Where doctors want to do things quickly, nurses want to do things quickly. So yeah, you get that pushback sometimes, because business wants things and they want it quickly. They don't really understand the ramification, right? They just expect services to be delivered. And there have been instances where, at the end of the day, the business, they accept the risk, right? So it's really more telling them, these are the risks involved. If you want to accept the risk, there's a process for accepting the risk. But sometimes when you really explain the risk to them and all the things that can go wrong, um, in most cases, they back down and say, okay, but next time give us a heads up or let us know what is involved. But yeah, it still happens even up till today. People want things to be done and they want it to be done quickly. And I've had people, go over me and call the CIO, like, yeah, no, it's okay. I'll talk to your CIO. But my CIO has my back, will call me to decide and we'll discuss it. And when we get in front of the business, we have a common front, which has been very helpful. But sometimes, I mean, the pressure from above is so high, but you just make sure that, they go through the risk acceptance process.
So you clearly have an awesome responsibility with New York City Department of Transportation. I can't even imagine the complexity of some of that. What are some of the challenges that you face in getting your security controls forward to build this resilient culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it on the head, right? When you talked about the culture, right? Is how do you build that culture and make everybody understand security is everybody's responsibility, right? But in terms of challenges, it's really been, both financial and human. Um, just getting to hire people that are really experienced in the field. A lot of people want to get into security because it's an interesting field, it's a growing field, but sometimes they don't really have the necessary experience, especially when it comes to being technical, understanding databases, understanding application security, incident response, and things like that. So that's been a challenge. It took me 2 years. I had to open positions. It took me 2 years to be able to fill those positions. And
Oh,
that
why did that take so long?
Yeah, because I had a series of interviews and I just couldn't find the right candidates. It was more enthusiasm than experience, right? People were really enthusiastic about getting into the field, but sometimes, you need people who can hit the ground running. But at the end of the day, I had to, make some compromises, right? New York City has a great program for, college students, right? To do internship. Unfortunately, I found an intern that was very smart, who'd been with us for over a year. And at the end, I just had to use one of the positions for him to say, hey, listen, this guy gets it, is smart, and he can grow with the team. The other person, I had to make some compromises. They were strong in some areas, not in some other areas. And I was like, okay, we'll train him in those other areas. And that's what we're doing now. So it's really been, getting the, skilled resources that one needs. And the other piece is what we talked about earlier. How do you get the business buy-in, right? And how do you even get the folks in information technology, they push back more than more than the business sometimes, right? Because of the nature of the job. I mean, everybody's stressed out, they have a lot of things to do, but the vulnerabilities keep coming, right? And we have to be on top of them when it comes to patch management, vulnerability management. And that rubs them off the wrong way sometimes. It's like, hey, it affects the business, we have to drop things, But what I've been doing in the past, has been just making them understand the importance of their role, right? If you're an IT, you're a data custodian. So you have the responsibility to protect that data, whether you're doing encryption, whether you're backing it up and testing that. And security is the same. You have to make sure you apply the back patches in a timely manner. And if there are vulnerabilities, to address them. So I've turned it into their own responsibilities right now, right? And all I do is just make sure that those things are done in a timely manner. But those are the challenges, just trying to get everybody on the same page.
Where do you see spending most of your time? I mean, if we look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, for example, and we could be investing in prevention. We could be investing in governance. We could be investing in detection controls, or we could be, beefing up our incident response. So where do you see that you're spending, if you were to look at, say, percentages, where would you say that you're spending your investment?
Um, So right now is really more on because a lot of those things that when we talk about endpoint security are things that we've learned over a period of time. So those controls are always there, right? So we're familiar with those ones. But I'll say investment right now really has to do more with vulnerability management. We do a lot of homegrown application development, so we spend a lot of time on, SDLC, software lifecycle development, and make sure that we go through the OAPS top 10 for, best cybersecurity practices for application. So working with the developers, we spend a lot of time. We have a tedious process for any application to go into production, right? So, and then cloud security we're getting a lot of pressure from the business to act quickly and to get things done, and sometimes it just makes sense to go to the cloud to do that. So that's a lot. So cloud security, we do a lot of security risk assessment before we go into the cloud, and we do a lot of audits of whether it's AWS or Microsoft Azure, a lot of security assessment that we do to make sure that the necessary controls are in place. And then finally, incident response, right? We're talking about resiliency. How do we make sure we have regular tabletop exercises? How do we make sure that, we have all the necessary communication in place, right? We don't want something to go wrong, and that's the first time we're meeting, all the lawyers, or that's the time we're working with people who work for emergency response, right? So building those relationships, making sure we test our controls, and making sure we do those tabletop exercises to make sure that everybody knows who to call, when to call, and how to reach them.
Well, this month we're actually talking about cloud security, and as one of our themes on the CISO Stories podcast, what sort of things would you say are really important when you're doing an assessment around cloud security? What are those things that you're looking for?
So most of the time it's configuration, configuration management. What are the features and functions that we're using, and how are we using them safely? So that's something that we do because, as security professionals, we don't really have visibility into the configuration piece, right? So we teach them, advise them on best security practices. But what we do is, with our vendors, whether it's AWS or with Azure, we make sure that we do security risk assessments periodically, working with them. So that way they review all the configuration parameters, they review all the security controls that should be in place and tell us where those gaps are, right? So that way, and there are always gaps, right? Because, the cloud security is still growing, and a lot of those features are not turned on by default, right? So some of them you have to work with the vendors to ask for additional things, to put in place, whether it's your web application firewall or if it's AWS Shield, and all those functions and features that don't come by default. And even when they come, right, you have to make sure they're properly configured based on your environment. So those are the biggest things that we do. But I think the most important thing is having those periodic assessments just to make sure that whatever gaps that are there are remediated in a timely manner.
How do you find it working with like Azure and Amazon, AWS, in terms of, being that they're so much bigger and no matter what size company we are, we're always smaller than that. How good is that to work with, and do you have any tips for working with those organizations?
So, we're fortunate, right? Although I work for New York City Department of Transportation, all city agencies actually, we have like an oversight organization called Office of Technology and Innovation, OTI, New York City OTI. And I'll probably say like 5 to 10 years back, all the agencies they did their own thing. We all had our own contracts with AWS, with Microsoft, and that has been consolidated. So I think we're benefiting from that consolidation now, right? So we have a great relationship with OTI, with OTI, which is the New York City agency, and more so with the cloud providers, right? We deal with them directly, whether it's troubleshooting. We have regular sessions with them, whether it's on zero trust, whether it's on incident response, So that partnership has been, very helpful. I'm not sure if it's because of the size of New York City, or that's how they are with other organizations, but our relationship with them has been very productive, right? Anytime there's a new technology, they have sessions with us. If we have issues, we escalate to them. So for me, I think it's been great, whether it's Microsoft or AWS.
So what sort of clauses do you put in those contracts with your cloud providers to get what you need?
Um, it's challenging dealing with bigger companies like that, like smaller companies where, we have a lot of assessments that we have to do because of their size, more or less is, we do a global one with them. But we do work a lot with our lawyers, right? Because we have, things that we call like a cloud agreement, which all vendors have to, irrespective of their size, they have to complete, right? And in there, we have all the security controls that we expect in there, all documented. And all the lawyers meet and they redline it and come back with what is acceptable. So I think that has been very helpful. That ability to get the lawyers involved. Make sure that
Do
whatever
you have
control.
like do Do you have, in addition to the controls, do you have them, are they aligning to specific frameworks, or do you have a right to audit clauses? Do you get their audit logs? What sort of stuff are you, getting back that gives you the assurance that you have a secure environment?
Right. So it's a two-way partnership because, it's a handshake, right? There's only so far we can get into the environment, right? So, but on the configuration piece, we have access to all our dashboards. We have access to all our logs, right? And as you said, we work with them to do those periodic audits and self-assessments, right, of our environment. So, um, because a lot of those functions and features are relatively new, so sometimes we still need them to hold our hands, to be able to do that. Um, but I think the way the partnership works, we know, where they draw the line and say, hey, listen, this is your responsibility, which is one of the things I mentioned earlier about security, right? There's some features that are like a default, and there's some that you actually have to request, hey, can we have this? Right. And what we've been doing in the past few years has been standardizing all those controls to make sure that, for any new application or any new service, it's pretty much consistent, right? And that's been successful.
What are some of those controls that you've found that you've added on that have been very beneficial in those environments?
Yeah. So I mean, mostly in the AWS environment is being, and I mean, they might call them different names, but it's a web application firewall, right? That's very important because, like I said, we do a lot of homegrown application, right? We have a lot of public facing applications, right? Because we work for the city, and a lot of the things that we do involves, the average New York City resident, right? So those controls are in place. And then we work with other partners to do pen test and vulnerability scans on those public facing applications, right? Just to validate that there are no vulnerabilities in there. And then when it comes to databases, database security, the key management, those are things that, we pay great attention to. The S3 buckets, are they secure? Are they publicly accessible to people that are not authorized, right? So those are the critical things that we do. And then audit trails, reviewing those audit trails, making sure we have access to those audit trails in a timely manner, making sure that we get alerts if anything, malicious or suspicious is going on, right? So those are some of the controls that, we have access to and that are active are very important to our security profile.
What sort of things are you doing around incident playbooks for, when these things actually happen so that you're, limiting the impact of the damage?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been working on, it's been making sure that we have redundancy for redundancy, especially for our critical applications and systems, right? So redundancy is key. And a lot of other things is making sure we have all the necessary security tools in place, right? Whether we're talking about having a SIM in place or having tools in place that can tell us if there's any anomalous behavior, right? So, somebody's, deleting a lot of data, right, or transferring large sums of data, we have all those tools in place that's going to notify us, right? And the other thing is, like you said, we built a IR playbook, right? Incident response playbook, right? That we review every 6 months. And that includes, our communication plan, includes, our incident rating, right? From 5 to, is it high, is it critical, those things. And then more importantly, uh, we do regular tabletop exercises. And when we do it, it's not just with folks in IT, right? We do it with our partners, Office of Technology and Innovation, and then we do it with the different business units, right, and business divisions. So that way they understand what we're trying to do. And then when it comes to communication, right, we have backups for communication. We have tools that we use that are outside our network in the cloud. So, and then even for telephones, right, we have two providers, two carriers. So, say for example, something is wrong with a T-Mobile, for example, or, with Verizon, for example. There are backups for that. And then there's additional backup of other entities in the cloud, right? So it's not just having the plan, it's about having those, redundancy in place for critical systems, right, and applications. So that's the primary thing. And then obviously, the incident response. If something happens, do we know who to call, when to call, right? How do we escalate? Do we have the relationships with the vendors? Do we have the information with the vendors we deal with? Right. So all that is documented. Is there an AWS thing? Do we have the right people at AWS that we can call at 2 a.m. that will respond? You know, is this Cisco? Is there any other third party provider, right, that we work with? Making sure we have all those information. And apart from that, like I said, the vulnerability management stuff is important for us. Making sure that if they have any vulnerabilities, especially ones that can be exploited, that they notify us so that we can respond quickly.
Do you find that there's some systems that, I mean, it sounds like you have a really good redundancy program there with multiple carriers and so forth. Do you find that sometimes you get that one system or two that is an old system that is just very difficult to get that redundancy in there, and that becomes a single point of failure?
Oh yeah, except it's a new organization that's like 2 or 3 years old. If it's an organization that is old, definitely you have legacy systems in there, right? And I mean, like every organization, we have one or two. So it's really more about mitigation when it comes to that point, right? Um, how do you mitigate the impact if something bad happens to that? Whether we're talking about the data or we're just talking about the system being up, right? Um, and in those cases, what do you do? I mean, you find out, is there like a paper process that you can fall back to for a period of time, right? So that, if the system is down for like a week or two, right, you can go to paper and then, when it comes back up, now you can, try and figure out how to get all that information back. So, you have things like that. And if it's an application, right, you start working with the business, sometimes it takes 3 years or 5 years, but now the question is, how do we get off this, right, quickly? What's the solution? Do we need to build another one? Do we need to buy another one? Do we just need, to decommission it, right? And try and see if we can use some existing system or application to do the same thing. But that's always a challenge, right? Because, sometimes even when you move to the new application, the business wants to hang on to the old one, right? Because they're just so used to it, and if it's still vulnerable or running on an end of life or end of support operating system, that becomes a challenge because you just want to get those things out of your environment as quickly as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been great, Olusegun. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective. What final advice would you give to current CISOs, emerging CISOs, new CISOs as they're trying to build a cyber resilient environment, particularly as we're moving more and more into the cloud?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is the relationship, right? You can't work as an island and you can't work as a sheriff, right? You can't go out dishing out orders and telling people the sky is going to fall if they don't do anything, right? So the first thing is making sure that either is with first of all, if you're reporting to a CIO, make sure that you're both on the same page, right? You understand what you're trying to do, you're all rowing in the same direction, and it can be your advocate. And more importantly, he has that confidence and faith in you that, if you give him your word, he's going to back you up, right? That's very important. The second thing is to make sure, if you're in business, the C-suite understands. And if you're in the public sector, whether it's a commissioner or as a secretary in the federal government, understands what you're trying to do. You build a program, a strategic program, and you make sure they've seen the program. It's not something that, you're just keeping in the share drive. You've talked to them, you've made a presentation to tell them, these are my strategic plans for the next 5 years. This is our security program. This is why we have to do this, right? And, it might inconvenience some people. There might be pain along the way, but it's in the best interest of the organization. So when you build those relationships, it helps because, like I said, it's the tone at the top, right? If they're driving it from the top, it's successful. And then the other thing is people who are critical, stakeholders that are critical to to the organization. So, for example, people in procurement, right? You need to make them understand anybody just can't come, go out and buy the cloud service, right? Or buy some other system and just bring it in, right? They need to make sure they loop in security and information technology team. The other piece is the lawyers, right? You have to make sure that the lawyers understand what we're trying to do because they handle privacy, right? So you make sure you build those relationships, right? We have a team called emergency response, right, for things like that. You make sure you have a relationship with them so that when something happens, that is inevitable, everybody already knows you. They already understand what the program is. They already understand what the strategic plan is, and nobody is surprised, right? So that everybody can come together and support you because they understand your vision.
I, I think that's so on point, and I love your point about setting expectations that there will be pain along the way, because
Oh, yes, it is
these things aren't
inevitable.
always easy to change the environment. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure entirely mine. Thanks. All the best.
Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode of the CISO Stories podcast. We want to say a special thank you to our sponsor, Arctic Wolf. Please subscribe to the CISO Stories podcast and you will receive a new story each Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll see you next week for a new episode.